Forgotten flower. The botanical garden of Delhi University buzzed with activity as students and faculty prepared specimens for the annual exhibition. Among them, Prisha Malhotra worked meticulously, her nimble fingers arranging rare medicinal plants with practiced precision. At 32, she had spent the last 8 years as a research assistant in the botany department, quietly revolutionizing cultivation techniques for endangered Himalayan species. "Vikram will be presenting your research today, yes?" Dr. Kapoor asked, adjusting his glasses as he inspected her display. Prisha nodded with a small smile. "He's better at the presentations. You know how I get with crowds." What she didn't say was that it had been Vikram's idea, her boyfriend of 5 years and the department's rising star, to put his name first on their joint research papers. "You'll get your turn," he'd promised years ago. "Let me establish our reputation first." The exhibition hall filled with academics, government officials, and representatives from environmental organizations. Prisha spotted Vikram in his perfectly tailored navy suit, commanding attention as he guided a group of distinguished visitors through the displays. His confident voice carried across the room, explaining complex botanical concepts with an ease she'd always admired. The breakthrough in germination techniques for these alpine specimens could revolutionize pharmaceutical cultivation, Vikram announced, gesturing toward her display without acknowledging her presence. "My team has been developing this methodology for 3 years." "My team." The words stung, but Prisha had grown accustomed to fading into the background. She adjusted her simple cotton salwar kameez and continued arranging the specimens, telling herself that the work mattered more than recognition. Later that evening, the university hosted its annual fundraising gala. Prisha had spent hours preparing, wearing a forest green silk sari that Vikram had once said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She spotted him surrounded by potential donors, champagne glass in hand. "Ah, there you are," he said when she approached, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Could you check if they've set up the presentation materials for my speech?" Before she could answer, a distinguished woman in an elegant ivory suit turned to her. "Are you part of Dr. Agarwal's research team? Your exhibition was fascinating." "She's actually," Prisha began. "She's just an assistant," Vikram interrupted smoothly. "Prisha helps with the basic cultivation." The woman's interest visibly dimmed as she turned back to Vikram, who seamlessly continued discussing the implications of his research. Hours later, as the event reached its peak, the university chancellor announced a prestigious research grant. This year's Environmental Innovation Award goes to Dr. Vikram Sharma for his groundbreaking work in alpine botanical preservation. Applause filled the room as Vikram took the stage. Prisha clapped mechanically, her heart sinking as he began his acceptance speech without a single mention of her contributions. After the ceremony, she found him surrounded by admirers near the bar. "Congratulations," she said when they finally had a moment alone. "But Vikram, you didn't mention our collaborative work." "The germination technique was my innovation." His expression hardened. "Don't start this again, Prisha. Not tonight." "But it's been years of the same pattern. You promised—" "What did I promise?" he snapped, lowering his voice but unable to hide his irritation. "That I'd credit my assistant. You should be grateful I've kept you this long." "Your assistant?" Her voice trembled. "I'm your research partner, your equal." Vikram laughed, the sound cutting through her. "Equal? Be realistic. Your family runs a flower shop in a forgotten corner of Old Delhi. You barely managed to get your master's degree. I come from 3 generations of academics. We were never equals." She felt eyes turning toward them, the curious glances of colleagues who had stopped their conversations to listen. "I loved you," she whispered. "And I tried to help you," he replied, loud enough for others to hear. "But let's be honest, Prisha. In this world of scientific excellence, you're worth nothing without me. Just a simple girl with dirt under her fingernails." The room seemed to freeze. Prisha became acutely aware of the silence around them, the pitying glances, the uncomfortable shifts of those nearby. 5 years of love, 8 years of research, countless hours of work, all reduced to nothing in a single moment of cruel honesty. Without a word, she removed the research badge hanging around her neck and placed it on the table between them. Then, with dignity she didn't know she possessed, Prisha walked out of the gala, out of the university grounds, and into the warm Delhi night. The stars above seemed brighter than usual as she made her way to the small apartment she had shared with Vikram. By morning, she would be gone, taking only what was truly hers, her research notes, her dignity, and a newly planted seed of determination that would, in time, grow into something magnificent. Seeds of renewal. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Prisha's childhood bedroom in Old Delhi. 6 months had passed since she had walked away from the university, from Vikram, from the life she had carefully constructed over 8 years. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of her parents' flower shop coming to life below, water splashing as stems were trimmed, the rustle of paper wrapping bouquets, her father's deep voice greeting the first customers of the day. "Beta, your breakfast is getting cold," her mother called from downstairs. Prisha sighed and pulled herself out of bed. At 32, living with her parents again felt like a step backward, yet their unconditional acceptance had become her sanctuary. The modest 2-story building housed their flower shop on the ground floor and their living quarters above. It smelled perpetually of jasmine and marigold, a scent that had once embarrassed her when Vikram visited but now brought comfort. "I've been thinking," her father said as she joined them for breakfast, his weathered hands cradling a cup of chai. "The empty plot behind the shop. We should do something with it." Prisha nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. She had applied for research positions at smaller institutions, even environmental NGOs. But her lack of published work under her own name had become an insurmountable barrier. Vikram had effectively erased her from her own career. "You're not listening, Prisha," her mother said gently. "Your father is offering you the land for your work." This caught her attention. "My work?" Her father smiled. "We may be simple flower sellers, but we're not blind. Those techniques you developed for growing difficult plants, we've seen what they can do. Our neighbors have been asking how our roses bloom twice as long as theirs. That's just basic care and those medicinal herbs you've been growing on the balcony," her mother interrupted. "Mrs. Sharma's arthritis improved after using them. Dr. Gupta from the street clinic has been asking if you could grow more." Prisha looked between her parents, seeing not pity but pride. They had never understood the complexities of her research, but they had always recognized her gift. "The plot isn't large," her father continued, "but it gets good sunlight. You could build a proper greenhouse, start something of your own." The seed of an idea took root. Not a return to academia, but something new, something that was entirely hers. By the following month, Prisha had transformed the neglected plot into a modest, urban garden laboratory. Using her savings and a small loan from her uncle, she constructed a simple greenhouse and began experimenting with vertical farming techniques designed specifically for urban environments with limited space. She named her small enterprise Dharti, Earth. Her initial focus was practical, developing efficient growing methods for medicinal plants and herbs that could thrive in Delhi's polluted environment. She sold her produce to local clinics and Ayurvedic practitioners, building a reputation for exceptional quality. One evening, as she worked late adjusting the irrigation system she had designed, a soft knock interrupted her concentration. At the greenhouse door stood Nandini, a former colleague from the university. "I heard rumors you were doing something interesting," Nandini said, glancing around the greenhouse with undisguised curiosity. "But this is beyond what I imagined." Prisha wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her soil-stained clothes and the stark contrast to the polished academic environment they had shared. "It's just a small operation," she said, gesturing to the vertical growing towers, where rare medicinal herbs flourished. Nandini approached one of the systems, examining the intricate arrangement of plants growing in specialized nutrients rather than soil. "This is the technique you were developing at the university, isn't it? But you've refined it." Prisha nodded cautiously. "It uses 90% less water than traditional methods." "And these plants," Nandini continued, touching a leaf gently, "some of these species haven't been successfully cultivated outside their native habitats before." They spent hours discussing Prisha's innovations. As darkness fell, Nandini finally revealed the purpose of her visit. "I'm organizing a conference on sustainable urban agriculture next month. Small, but with some influential participants. Would you consider presenting your work?" Prisha hesitated. "Vikram might be there." "Vikram is in London on a research fellowship," Nandini replied. "And honestly, Prisha, his star has been fading since you left. The germination techniques aren't yielding consistent results without your expertise." A small, vindicating warmth spread through Prisha's chest, though she took no pleasure in the failure of important research. "I'll think about it." The conference changed everything. Speaking in her own voice for the first time, Prisha presented her adapted cultivation methods to an audience of environmental scientists, urban planners, and community organizers. Her practical approach, focusing on accessible techniques that could be implemented in densely populated areas with minimal resources, resonated deeply. "The future of food security in our cities doesn't depend solely on grand technological solutions," she concluded her presentation. "It requires innovations that work within our existing limitations, that respect traditional knowledge while embracing sustainable practices." Afterward, she was approached by representatives from several environmental organizations and community projects. By evening's end, she had secured contracts to implement her vertical farming systems in 3 community centers in underserved Delhi neighborhoods. As months passed, Darty expanded beyond the small plot behind her parents' shop. Prisha hired 2 assistants, young women from the neighborhood with an interest in botany but without access to formal education. She began documenting her methods meticulously, publishing open-source guides for urban farmers and conducting weekend workshops for community members. 1 year after leaving the university, Prisha received an email that made her heart race. The International Sustainable Agriculture Foundation was soliciting proposals for innovative urban farming solutions, with substantial funding for selected projects. The foundation was headed by Arjun Mehta, a reclusive tech billionaire who had redirected his fortune toward environmental causes after a near-fatal illness had reportedly changed his perspective on life. For 3 days, Prisha worked tirelessly on her proposal, detailing how her methods could be scaled to address food insecurity in megacities across South Asia. When she finally hit submit, she felt a sense of completion that had eluded her throughout her academic career. 2 weeks later, as she demonstrated grafting techniques to a group of school children visiting her greenhouse, her phone buzzed with an email notification. "Dear Ms. Malhotra," it read, "we are pleased to inform you that your proposal has been selected for the final evaluation stage. Mr. Mehta would like to visit your operation personally next month." Prisha looked around her modest greenhouse, at the children eagerly examining the plants, at the simple but effective systems she had built with her own hands. For the first time since that painful night at the university gala, she felt not just competent or adequate, but truly valued for her work, under her own name. The journey from forgotten research assistant to independent innovator had been painful, But standing amidst the literal fruits of her labor, Prisha realized that being forced to leave her old life behind had actually been the first step toward finding her true worth. The garden estate. The monsoon rains had just ended, leaving Delhi washed clean and vibrant when Prisha received confirmation of Arjun Mehta's visit. Known for his technological innovations that had revolutionized renewable energy storage, Mehta had become something of a mythical figure in recent years. After surviving a rare form of cancer 5 years ago, he had withdrawn from public life, focusing his vast resources on environmental sustainability projects from his secluded estate in the Himalayan foothills. Prisha spent days preparing for the visit, ensuring her demonstration gardens were immaculate and her documentation thorough. Despite her growing success, meeting someone of Mehta's stature made her nervous. The morning of his scheduled arrival, she changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple handloom kurta in deep indigo, professional but true to her roots. At precisely 10 o'clock, a modest electric car pulled up outside Darty's entrance. Prisha had expected an entourage, perhaps security personnel, but only 2 people emerged, a slender woman in a crisp linen suit and a tall man dressed in a simple white shirt and khaki pants. If not for the distinctive streak of silver in his otherwise black hair, Prisha might not have recognized Arjun Mehta from the few photographs that existed of him online. "Ms. Malhotra," the woman extended her hand. "I'm Tanvi Rao, Mr. Mehta's Chief of Operations." Mehta himself offered a brief nod, his eyes already scanning the vertical growing systems visible through the greenhouse glass. "Impressive use of space," he remarked, his voice unexpectedly soft. For the next 2 hours, Prisha guided them through her operation, explaining her irrigation innovations, the specialized nutrient mixtures she had developed, and her community education programs. While Tanvi took meticulous notes, Mehta said little, occasionally touching a leaf or examining a root system with surprising gentleness. "Your proposal mentioned scalability," he finally said as they completed the tour. "I'd like to see your implementation plans." In the small office adjoining the greenhouse, Prisha spread out her detailed diagrams. "The beauty of this system is its adaptability," she explained, confidence growing as she discussed her work. "The same principles can be applied whether we're working with a balcony garden or a 5-acre plot." Mehta studied the plans, occasionally asking incisive questions that revealed a deeper understanding of botany than she had expected from a tech entrepreneur. When she explained how she had modified her techniques to accommodate Delhi's poor air quality, he seemed particularly interested. "We've been attempting something similar at Vanya," he said, referring to his estate by its name for the first time. "Without success?" Prisha ventured. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Limited success. The Himalayan climate presents different challenges." After they left, promising to be in touch soon, Prisha felt oddly deflated. Mehta had been polite, but reserved, revealing little about his intentions. She wondered if her simple operation had seemed too modest compared to the grand projects his foundation typically funded. 3 days later, Tanvi called. "Mr. Mehta was impressed with your work," she said without preamble. "But rather than funding your proposal as submitted, he has an alternative offer." Prisha listened with growing disbelief as Tanvi explained. Mehta wasn't offering to fund her community gardens. He was inviting her to Vanya to revitalize the estate's historic gardens, which had fallen into decline. The position would be for 6 months initially, with generous compensation and the opportunity to implement her techniques on a scale she had only dreamed of. "Why me?" Prisha asked. "Surely there are more established experts." "Mr. Mehta values practical innovation over credentials," Tanvi replied. "And he was particularly impressed by your community education approach." A week later, Prisha found herself in a luxury electric vehicle winding up mountain roads toward Vanya. As they climbed higher, Delhi's pollution gave way to crisp mountain air scented with pine. When they finally passed through ornate gates, and the estate came into view, Prisha gasped involuntarily. Vanya wasn't simply a house, but a sprawling complex nestled against the mountainside. The main building blended traditional Himalayan architecture with modern sustainable design, all glass, local stone, and living green roofs. Surrounding it were what had once clearly been magnificent terraced gardens, now showing signs of neglect, despite obvious recent attempts at maintenance. Tanvi led her to a beautiful guest cottage overlooking the eastern gardens. "Mr. Mehta has arranged for you to have access to all areas of the estate," she explained. "He'll meet with you tomorrow morning to discuss his vision for the restoration." Left alone, Prisha spent the evening exploring the nearest garden areas, making mental notes of the soil conditions and native species struggling to survive alongside non-indigenous ornamentals. It was clear that someone had attempted to maintain the gardens using conventional methods unsuited to the unique microclimate. At breakfast the next morning, served in a glass-walled pavilion with breathtaking mountain views, Arjun Mehta appeared more relaxed than during their Delhi meeting, dressed in a comfortable kurta. "The gardens were my grandmother's creation," he explained, pouring tea from an elegant cast-iron pot. Before her marriage, she studied botany at Oxford, unusual for an Indian woman in the 1950s. She designed these gardens to showcase species from around the world that could adapt to Himalayan conditions. "A visionary approach," Prisha commented. "Indeed. After she passed, my father hired conventional gardeners who didn't understand her integrated systems. They maintained the appearance but lost the underlying philosophy." He set down his cup with precision. "When I inherited Vanya, I wanted to restore her vision, but with modern, sustainable practices." "Why not hire a landscape architect?" Prisha asked. "Someone with experience in historical garden restoration?" Mehta's expression hardened slightly. "I did. 3, in fact, all with impressive credentials from prestigious institutions." And they all proposed ripping out the existing gardens to install elaborate designs that would have required constant maintenance and resources. His tone had grown clipped. They saw the space as a canvas for their vision, not as a living system, to be nurtured. Prisha nodded, understanding his frustration. "What exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Mehta?" "First, please call me Arjun. And second, I don't expect anything. I hope for a collaborative approach. Your work in Delhi showed respect for both natural systems and human needs. That balance is what Vanya requires." The initial weeks proved challenging. While Arjun provided unlimited resources, he also maintained high expectations. Their first major disagreement came when Prisha proposed removing a section of ornamental cherry trees that were struggling in the mountain climate. "Those were my grandmother's favorites," he said firmly during their weekly meeting. "They stay. They're consuming resources disproportionate to their contribution to the ecosystem," Prisha countered. "We could replace them with native flowering species that would support local pollinators." "The cherries are non-negotiable." Rather than argue further, Prisha spent the next week developing a microclimate solution, a combination of companion plants and a modified irrigation system that would support the cherries while reducing their resource demands. When she demonstrated the prototype to Arjun, his expression remained impassive, but he approved the implementation immediately. As weeks turned to months, they established a rhythm of respectful collaboration. Arjun proved to be not just a demanding employer, but a knowledgeable partner with genuine passion for sustainable systems. He often joined Prisha in the gardens, asking insightful questions and occasionally offering suggestions that revealed his grandmother's teachings. One evening, as they examined newly planted medicinal herbs in the moonlight, certain species responded better when planted under specific lunar phases, according to both Prisha's research and Arjun's grandmother's notes. He surprised her with a personal question. "What led you to this work, Prisha?" Tanvi's background check mentioned you were once on an academic track at Delhi University. She stiffened, unsure how much he knew about her past with Vikram. I discovered my research had more practical applications outside academia. Arjun studied her face in the silvery light, clearly sensing there was more to the story. But he didn't press further. Whatever the reason, Vanya is fortunate you made that choice. It was the first personal compliment he had offered, and Prisha felt an unexpected warmth in response. As they continued walking through the moonlit garden, discussing the next phase of restoration, she realized that somewhere along the way, their professional relationship had evolved into something she hadn't experienced since before Vikram's betrayal. Genuine intellectual partnership based on mutual respect. The gardens of Vanya were coming back to life under their combined vision, and something else was blooming too. A fragile trust that neither of them had anticipated when she first arrived at the mountain estate. Blooming truth. 4 months into her stay at Vanya, Prisha woke to the season's first snowfall. Delicate flakes drifted past her window, transforming the restored gardens into a winter wonderland. The mountainside gleamed in the early morning, light, each branch and leaf outlined in crystalline white. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the cottage porch, breathing in the crisp air. The estate had become more than a workplace. It had become a sanctuary where her ideas were not just implemented but valued. The initial tension with Arjun had gradually dissolved into a comfortable working relationship, punctuated by long discussions over evening tea about everything from ancient agricultural practices to cutting-edge sustainability technologies. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tanvi. Meeting in the library at 9. Important opportunity to discuss. When Prisha arrived at the main house, she found Arjun and Tanvi reviewing documents spread across an antique table. The library was Prisha's favorite room at Vanya, walls lined with rare botanical texts collected by Arjun's grandmother, interspersed with modern scientific literature and traditional knowledge systems from around the world. "Good morning," Arjun greeted her, his usual reserve softened by what appeared to be excitement. "We've received an interesting invitation." Tanvi handed her an embossed card. "The International Forum on Climate Resilience is being held in Mumbai next month. They've invited Arjun to deliver the keynote address." "Congratulations," Prisha said, unsure why this concerned her. "I've declined," Arjun stated, surprising her, "but I've suggested an alternative speaker." Prisha glanced between them, realization dawning. "Me? But I'm not—" "You're precisely what this forum needs," Arjun interrupted. "They've become too theoretical, too detached from practical implementation. Your work here at Vanya, combining traditional knowledge with innovative techniques, offers a concrete path forward." "The restoration isn't complete," she protested, "which makes it an even more compelling case study," Tanvi added. "Real work in progress, not just polished theory." Prisha sat down, overwhelmed by the suggestion. "This is a high-profile event. Government officials, international organizations, and academics," Arjun said quietly, studying her face. "Including representatives from Delhi University's Environmental Sciences Department." Her stomach tightened. Vikram might be there. The thought of facing him, of potentially being dismissed again in a professional setting, made her palms sweat. "You don't have to decide immediately," Arjun said, his tone gentler than usual. "But consider this. Your work deserves recognition, not just here at Vanya, but in the wider scientific community." That evening, Prisha wandered through the snow-covered gardens, weighing her options. The forum would provide a platform to share her innovations with those who could implement them on a global scale. But it also meant risking another encounter with Vikram and the academic world that had once made her feel so insignificant. A familiar figure appeared on the path ahead, Arjun, wrapped in a charcoal gray overcoat, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I come here to think too," he said by way of greeting. They walked in companionable silence until reaching the Japanese-inspired meditation garden they had recently completed together. "I know about Delhi University," Arjun said finally. "About Dr. Sharma taking credit for your research." Prisha stopped walking. "How?" "It wasn't in Tanvi's background check, if that's what you're wondering." He brushed snow from a stone bench and gestured for her to sit. "Dr. Nandini Kapoor is an old friend. She mentioned your story when I consulted her about specialists in urban agriculture." Prisha felt strangely exposed, as if the carefully constructed walls between her past and present had suddenly collapsed. "She spoke highly of your brilliance," Arjun continued, "and expressed regret for not standing up for you at the time." "It doesn't matter anymore," Prisha said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "It matters very much," Arjun replied, his voice uncharacteristically passionate. "What happened to you reflects a systemic problem in how innovation is recognized and credited. Your story is part of why the work you're doing now is so important." He turned to face her fully. "Prisha, I'm not asking you to speak at this forum to confront your past. I'm asking because the world needs to hear your vision directly from you, without intermediaries or those who would diminish your contribution." His faith in her was both terrifying and exhilarating. Over the following weeks, as they prepared her presentation together, Prisha found herself opening up about the pain of her experience with Vikram, the humiliation of that final night, and her struggle to rebuild her professional identity. Arjun proved to be a surprisingly patient listener and an incisive advisor as they developed her keynote address. Together, they crafted a presentation that highlighted the Vanya Restoration Project as a model for climate-resilient agriculture that honored traditional knowledge while embracing innovation. The day before they were to leave for Mumbai, Arjun invited Prisha to join him for tea in his grandmother's original greenhouse, a Victorian structure they had carefully preserved at the heart of the estate. "I have something for you," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rare Himalayan flower they had successfully reintroduced to the Vanya Gardens. "My grandmother wore this when she presented her research at botanical conferences," Arjun explained. "She faced similar dismissal from her male colleagues. This was her reminder that truth, like nature, eventually finds its way into the light." Prisha's fingers trembled as she lifted the brooch. "I can't accept something so personal." "You can," he insisted gently. "And you should. You've brought her gardens back to life. She would have wanted you to have it." The gesture carried a weight of recognition that no academic accolade ever had. As Arjun carefully pinned the brooch to her shawl, their eyes met, and Prisha saw something beyond professional admiration in his gaze. A warmth that mirrored the feelings she had been carefully guarding in her own heart. The Mumbai Conference Center hummed with activity as delegates from around the world gathered for the forum's opening reception. Prisha, wearing a contemporary silk jacket over a traditional lehenga in shades of emerald and gold, found herself the center of attention. As Arjun introduced her to influential figures in environmental policy and sustainable development. Ms. Malhotra's innovations at Vanya have increased yield while reducing water consumption by 60%, he explained to an impressed Minister of Agriculture. And the techniques are scalable to both small farms and larger operations. Prisha was describing her community education approach to a group of NGO representatives when a familiar voice behind her made her freeze. "Well, this is unexpected. My former assistant, now rubbing shoulders with the elite." She turned slowly to find Vikram standing there, older but unchanged in his arrogance. He wore the same self-satisfied smile she remembered, though his eyes betrayed surprise at finding her in such distinguished company. "Dr. Sharma," she acknowledged coolly. I didn't realize you were attending. Last-minute invitation, he replied. Delhi University is exploring collaborations with the Climate Resilience Initiative. His gaze flicked to the silver brooch at her shoulder, then to Arjun, who had appeared protectively at her side. I see you found a powerful patron. Always the smart strategy. The insinuation hung in the air, toxic and familiar. 5 months ago, it might have crushed her confidence. But standing there, with her work recognized and her integrity intact, Prisha felt only a distant sadness for the man she had once loved. Actually, Arjun interjected, his voice carrying just enough to attract attention from nearby delegates, Ms. Malhotra is our keynote speaker tomorrow. Her pioneering work in integrating traditional knowledge systems with modern sustainable agriculture has transformed our understanding of climate-resilient farming practices. Vikram's smug expression faltered. Keynote? But she's not even published in any significant journals. Publication isn't the only measure of innovation. Dr. Sharma, Arjun replied smoothly. Sometimes the most groundbreaking work happens outside institutional constraints. As other delegates gathered around, drawn by the exchange, Prisha found her voice. My presentation tomorrow will include the fully developed germination techniques. For alpine medicinal plants, the research you presented at Delhi University 3 years ago. She met Vikram's gaze steadily. You might find it educational to see how the methodology has evolved since then. Color drained from Vikram's face as he realized the implications, that she would effectively be reclaiming her work in front of the international scientific community. Before he could respond, the forum director called for attention to formally welcome the delegates. As the crowd shifted, Arjun leaned close to Prisha. Are you all right? He murmured. She touched the silver brooch at her shoulder, feeling a connection. Not just to Arjun's grandmother, but to generations of women whose contributions had been overlooked. Better than all right, she replied. I'm exactly where I need to be. That night, as she finalized her presentation in her hotel room, Prisha realized that confronting Vikram had been less about vindication and more about closing a chapter of her life. Tomorrow she would stand on that stage not as someone seeking approval or recognition, but as a woman who had found her own path to making a difference in the world. And regardless of how her former colleagues received her work, she knew that in the gardens of Vanya, and in the eyes of the man who had seen her true worth, she had already bloomed into her fullest self. Full bloom, the Mumbai Conference Center's main hall was filled to capacity as Prisha took the stage. Sunlight streamed through the skylights, illuminating the sustainable bamboo podium where her presentation notes waited. In the front row sat Arjun, his usually stoic expression replaced by unmistakable pride. Several rows back, she spotted Vikram, arms crossed defensively across his chest. Taking a deep breath, Prisha touched the silver flower brooch for courage and began. Traditional knowledge systems have always understood what modern science is, only beginning to quantify that resilience comes from diversity, adaptation, and respect for natural cycles. Her voice grew stronger with each word. At Vanya Estate, we've been implementing these principles to create agricultural systems that not only withstand climate challenges but actively regenerate their environments. For the next 40 minutes, she guided the audience through the Vanya Restoration Project, methodically explaining how combining ancient farming wisdom with innovative technology had transformed the struggling gardens into a model of sustainable abundance. She presented data showing increased yields, reduced resource consumption, and the successful reintroduction of endangered species. But perhaps most significant, she continued, approaching the section she had debated, including until the last moment, is our refinement of germination techniques for high-altitude medicinal plants. From the corner of her eye, she saw Vikram shift uncomfortably in his seat. Some of you may be familiar with earlier iterations of this research, she said, acknowledging with a slight nod toward the Delhi University contingent. Today, I'm presenting the complete methodology, including the temperature variation protocols that were missing from previous publications. With calm precision, she explained the techniques that had been her greatest academic contribution, the work Vikram had claimed as his own. Only now, instead of bitter accusation, she offered it as a gift to the scientific community, her name firmly attached to its complete form. When the presentation concluded, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As attendees lined up to ask questions, Prisha noticed Vikram slipping out of the hall, his expression unreadable. She felt no triumph at his retreat, only a peaceful certainty that she had reclaimed her narrative. The forum director approached as the Q&A session ended. Ms. Malhotra, several research institutions have requested meetings with you to discuss collaboration opportunities, and the Ministry of Environment has expressed interest in implementing your community education model nationally. Arjun joined them, standing close enough that Prisha could sense his warmth. I told you the world needed to hear your voice, he said quietly. The remainder of the forum passed in a whirlwind of meetings, workshops, and networking events. Prisha found herself surrounded by researchers, policymakers, and community organizers, eager to learn from her experiences. No longer the forgotten assistant, she was now a sought-after innovator in her own right. On the final evening, the forum hosted a gala dinner to celebrate climate innovation leaders. Prisha wore a midnight blue silk sari embroidered with silver threads that caught the light as she moved. A gift from Arjun's textile sustainability initiative, he had explained when presenting it to her that morning. She was deep in conversation with an agricultural minister from Singapore when Vikram approached their table, looking considerably less confident than during their first encounter. Prisha, he said, his tone carefully neutral. May I speak with you privately? After excusing herself, she followed him to a quieter corner of the ballroom. Up close, she could see the strain in his face, the way his once immaculate appearance had slipped into slight dishevelment. Your presentation was impressive, he began, the compliment clearly difficult for him. The temperature variation protocols, we could never replicate those results after you left. I know, she replied simply. He grimaced. I've been invited to submit a paper correcting the original research attribution. The department head was in the audience yesterday. Prisha felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly replaced by compassion for the man who had once meant everything to her. His arrogance had cost him not just her love, but his scientific integrity. Science is about truth, Vikram. It was never about either of us. For you, perhaps, he admitted. For me, it was always about recognition. He glanced across the room, to where Arjun was watching them with careful attention. Does he know how brilliant you really are? He saw it before I remembered it myself, she answered honestly. Vikram nodded slowly. I should have been that person. Without waiting for her response, he walked away, shoulders slightly hunched under the weight of belated regret. As Prisha returned to her table, she found Arjun had been called to the stage. The forum director was introducing him as the evening's honorary speaker, highlighting his foundation's contributions to climate resilience innovation. Arjun adjusted the microphone, his gaze finding Prisha in the crowd. When my grandmother created the gardens at Vanya, she did so because she believed that healing our relationship with the natural world was the most important work of any generation. I inherited her belief, but it took my own confrontation with mortality to truly understand it. He spoke briefly about his cancer diagnosis 5 years earlier, how facing death had clarified his purpose. But understanding a mission isn't the same as knowing how to fulfill it. For years, Vanya's gardens languished because I knew what needed to be done, but not how to accomplish it. His expression softened as he continued. Then I met a remarkable botanist who had left behind the prestige of academia to grow medicinal plants in her parents' backyard in Old Delhi. a woman who, despite having her work appropriated and her contributions dismissed, never lost her commitment to sharing knowledge freely with those who needed it most. Prisha felt tears threatening as Arjun's gaze held hers across the crowded room. Prisha Malhotra didn't just restore my grandmother's gardens. She reminded me that true innovation comes not from institutions or accolades, but from the courage to nurture what you believe in, even when others fail to see its value. He raised his glass. To all the unsung innovators whose work sustains our world, may we learn to recognize your worth before it's too late. The room erupted in applause. As guests raised their glasses, Prisha found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations and support. The minister from Singapore was discussing funding for a training center based on her methods. A representative from an international conservation organization wanted to document her techniques for implementation in similar climates worldwide. Hours later, as the gala wound down, Prisha stepped onto the hotel's garden terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. The Mumbai skyline glittered against the night sky, a constellation of human ambition and ingenuity. "There you are," Arjun said, joining her at the stone balustrade. "I've been looking for you." "That was quite a speech," she said, still processing the public acknowledgement of her work. "I meant every word." He turned to face her, his usual reserve completely gone. "Prisha, I'd like to make you an offer." She smiled. "Another 6-month contract at Vanya?" "No." His expression was serious. "A permanent position, as co-director of the Vanya Research Institute for Sustainable Agriculture." Prisha stared at him in shock. "Co-director? We'd develop the east wing of the estate into a proper research facility," he continued. "Implement your community education model on a larger scale. Create fellowship opportunities for promising students, particularly women from underrepresented backgrounds." The vision he described was everything she had ever wanted professionally. A place to conduct meaningful research, to mentor others, to make a tangible difference in sustainable food systems. "Why me?" she asked, echoing her question from their first meeting. "You could hire anyone with my qualifications now." Arjun's hand covered hers on the balustrade. "Because in all my years of building technology and accumulating wealth, I never met anyone who understood value the way you do. The true worth of things that can't be measured or claimed or owned." The warmth of his touch traveled up her arm, settling somewhere near her heart. "Is this a professional offer, Arjun?" He took a deep breath. "Not entirely. The Institute is a genuine proposal, regardless of your answer to my personal question. Which is? Whether you might consider exploring whatever this is between us." His gesture encompassed the small space between their bodies, the connection that had been growing steadily over the months of working together. "I'm not offering you the world, Prisha. Just my world, complicated and imperfect as it is." Prisha thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the painful night of Vikram's rejection, to the greenhouse behind her parents' shop, to the flourishing gardens of Vanya, and finally to this moment of perfect clarity. "I don't need the world," she said softly. "Just a place where my work and my heart can bloom together." When Arjun's lips met hers, Prisha felt as though every hardship, every setback, every moment of doubt had been leading her precisely to this point, to a love built on mutual respect and shared purpose. 3 weeks later, they stood together in Vanya's central garden, now transformed into an open-air classroom where farmers from surrounding villages gathered for their first training session. The morning sun filtered through newly planted trees, casting dappled light across faces eager to learn sustainable techniques. "Welcome to the first community workshop of the Vanya Institute," Prisha began, standing confidently before the group. "Today, we'll be exploring methods that have sustained these mountains for centuries, alongside innovations that can help us face the challenges ahead." As she guided participants through basic soil regeneration practices, she caught Arjun watching her from the edge of the gathering, his expression one of profound admiration. No longer the reclusive tech genius or the demanding employer, he had become her partner in all senses of the word, supporting her vision while respecting her independence. Later that evening, as they walked through the moonlit gardens reviewing the day's success, Arjun stopped beside the rare Himalayan flowers that had inspired her silver brooch. "My grandmother would have adored you," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind Prisha's ear. "She always said true worth reveals itself slowly, like these flowers that only bloom after years of careful tending." Prisha leaned into his embrace, thinking of how far she had come from that night at the university gala when Vikram had declared her worthless. The journey had taught her that value wasn't bestowed by others. It was intrinsic, waiting to be recognized by those with eyes to see it. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I left Delhi, I thought I was walking away from everything I'd worked for. I never imagined I was actually walking toward everything I deserved." Arjun kissed her forehead gently. "Not just deserved, Prisha. Earned. All of this, you've earned through your brilliance, your resilience, and your unwavering integrity." As they continued their evening stroll through the gardens they had restored together, Prisha felt a profound sense of homecoming. In the soil of heartbreak, she had planted seeds of determination. In the light of genuine appreciation, those seeds had grown into something more beautiful than she could have imagined. A life where her worth was not just acknowledged, but celebrated. Where her voice was not just heard, but amplified. And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of her labor and the love of a man who had seen her true value from the beginning, Prisha Malhotra knew with absolute certainty that she had finally, gloriously, come into full bloom.